1978. A small antiquities dealer somewhere near Minya, Egypt. Someone, and to this day we don't know exactly who, pulls a limestone box out of the ground. Inside, 13 sheets of papyrus, folded, brittle, covered in Coptic script. The dealer has no idea what he's holding. He sells it. It passes through several hands. Eventually, it ends up in a safe deposit box in a bank in Hicksville, New York. Not in the Vatican. Not in a museum. In a bank vault in a town called Hicksville. And there it sits for 16 years. Nobody reads it. Nobody translates it. Nobody even opens it carefully enough to prevent the pages from crumbling. What was inside that box was a text that Church Father Irenaeus of Lyon had tried to destroy in the year 180 AD. He called it fictitious history. He named it specifically in his writings. He warned Christians to stay away from it, and because he mentioned it by name. That warning is the reason we know the text existed at all. The text was called the Gospel of Judas, and what it says about the man who supposedly betrayed Jesus Christ turns 2,000 years of Christian understanding completely upside down. Before we go any further, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. That matters more than you think. It tells YouTube this kind of content has value, and it's what allows me to keep digging and bring you more of these discoveries. Because what I'm about to show you is the kind of thing that doesn't make it into Sunday school. And it absolutely should. Here's what every Christian is taught from childhood. Judas Iscariot was the traitor. The one who went to the chief priests and said, "Give me 30 pieces of silver and I'll hand him over to you." He betrayed Jesus with a kiss in the Garden of Gethsemane. He pointed out the Son of God to armed soldiers in the dark, under olive trees, using an embrace as a signal. And because of that act, that single kiss, he became the most universally condemned figure in the history of Christianity. His name became a synonym for treachery in dozens of languages. You call someone a Judas, and no further explanation is needed. After the arrest, Judas realizes what he's done. According to the Gospel of Matthew, he tries to return the 30 pieces of silver. The priests refuse. He throws the coins on the temple floor and goes out and hangs himself. Depending on which gospel account you read, he either hangs himself or falls headlong in a field and his body bursts open. Both accounts exist. They don't agree on the details, but they agree on the moral verdict. Judas was evil, Judas was damned, and Judas's act was the greatest betrayal in human history. That is the version, taught in 2 billion homes, preached from 2 billion pulpits. The version that has been for 20 centuries, the official story. But here's the thing. Irenaeus of Lyon, a bishop writing around 180 AD, felt threatened enough by an alternative account that he dedicated an entire section of his major theological work to denouncing it. You don't spend pages attacking a text unless that text has real power, unless people are reading it, unless the argument it makes is genuinely dangerous to the official story. And that text was already circulating in 180 AD, which means it existed before 180 AD, which means within living memory of the people who claimed to have known Judas personally, someone was telling a completely different story. I need to tell you something personal before we go further. For 12 years, I taught high school history at a Catholic school in Evansville, Indiana. And part of my curriculum, the part I actually liked teaching, was the history of early Christian heresies. The movements the church suppressed, the texts the councils rejected. I built a whole unit around it. And in that unit, I taught Irenaeus of Lyon. I taught Adversus Heresies, his great work against heresies. I taught my students that Irenaeus was one of the first systematic theologians to catalog and condemn Gnostic texts. I mentioned, because it was in my source material, that one of the texts he condemned was something called the Evangelium Judae, the Gospel of Judas. I taught this, and then I would move on. I never once stopped to ask, does the Gospel of Judas still exist? I assumed it had been destroyed, lost, that Irenaeus and the councils had done their work. The heretical texts were gone, and we had the canon we have today. It wasn't until I was 41 years old, sitting in a coffee shop in Indianapolis, reading a newspaper, and I mean an actual printed newspaper, that I saw the headline, National Geographic to publish, Lost Gospel of Judas. And I remember setting my coffee cup down very carefully, because I had the odd sensation that the floor had shifted slightly under my chair. I had been teaching the condemnation of the Gospel of Judas for 12 years. I had never known the Gospel of Judas had survived. Let me tell you what was actually in that limestone box, the document that scholars now call the Codex Chacos, named after Frieda Nussberger Chacos, the antiquities dealer who eventually acquired it and had the conscience to get it properly restored, is a bound manuscript, 26 pages, 13 folded sheets of papyrus, written in Coptic, which is the late form of the ancient Egyptian language written in Greek letters. The University of Arizona radiocarbon dated the physical papyrus to somewhere between 220 and 340 AD. But the text itself, the original, is from the 2nd century, 1st or 2nd generation after Jesus. The Coptic is a translation of a Greek original that is now lost. When the National Geographic Society acquired the rights to publish the translation in 2006, they assembled a team of scholars, Rodolphe Kasser, Marvin Meyer, and Gregor Wurst. They required participants to sign non-disclosure agreements before seeing the text, NDAs, in 2006 for an ancient papyrus, which tells you something about how significant and how potentially destabilizing they understood the contents to be. The mechanism of control, it turns out, is not only ancient. And what did the text say? The Gospel of Judas presents a conversation between Jesus and his 12 disciples. But in this account, Judas is the only one who truly understands who Jesus is. The other 11 are portrayed as spiritually blind. They worship a lesser god. They don't grasp the cosmic significance of what Jesus is doing. Jesus singles out Judas. He takes him aside, away from the others, and he tells him, "You will sacrifice the man that clothed me." Read that again. "You will sacrifice the man that clothed me. Not, you will betray me. Not, you will sell me for 30 pieces of silver." The language here is sacrificial, priestly. Judas is not being condemned. He is being commissioned. He is being asked to perform the most sacred act in the entire narrative, to release Jesus' divine spirit from the physical body that constrains it. The man that clothed me is the human body. Judas's act is not betrayal. It is liberation. In this text, Judas is not the villain of the story. He is the most faithful servant in it. Now here's where the investigation gets interesting. And I want you to sit with this for a moment. Because even within the canonical Gospels, the 4 you have in your Bible right now, there is a logical problem that nobody ever quite addresses. Think about it from the inside of the narrative. Jesus knows everything. He knows he is the Son of God. He knows he is about to die. He tells his disciples repeatedly that the Son of Man must be delivered to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him and hand him over to the Gentiles. He says this out loud, multiple times. According to John's Gospel, at the Last Supper, Jesus looks at Judas and says, "What you are going to do quickly." He knows what Judas is about to do. He tells him to go do it faster. So if Jesus knew the crucifixion was coming, if he knew it was necessary, if the entire plan of salvation depended on it, then what exactly did Judas do wrong? Without Judas, there is no arrest. Without the arrest, there is no trial. Without the trial, there is no crucifixion. Without the crucifixion, there is no resurrection. And without the resurrection, there is no Christianity as we know it. The entire theological architecture of the faith depends on the act that Judas performed. Bart Ehrman, professor at the University of North Carolina, one of the most widely read biblical scholars in the world, put it this way. In the Gospel of Judas, Judas is portrayed not as the evil, corrupt, devil-inspired follower of Jesus, but as Jesus' closest intimate and friend. The most trusted. The only one worthy of being entrusted with the most consequential act in the narrative. But then, the story gets more complicated, because not everyone who read the Codex Chakos agreed with that interpretation. And the disagreement that emerged is itself one of the most intellectually disorienting things I've encountered in 20 years of studying this material. In 2006, when National Geographic published their translation, the academic world reacted with a mixture of fascination and sharp dissent. The National Geographic team, Kasser, Meyer, and Wurst, read the text as presenting Judas as a hero, a spiritual champion, the most enlightened of the disciples. Their translation of a key Coptic phrase rendered Judas as a spirit, something elevated, something divine. But then April DeConick stepped in. DeConick is a professor at Rice University and one of the leading scholars of Gnostic texts in the world. She went through the Coptic manuscript herself, word by word, and she came to a startlingly different conclusion. The word that Kasser, Meyer, and Wurst had translated as spirit, the Coptic word daemon, she argued, does not mean spirit. Not in this context. Not in this kind of second-century Gnostic text. In the Greek and Coptic tradition of the period, daemon means demon. She called the National Geographic translation an act of scholarly malpractice. She presented her findings at a conference at Rice University and then published them in a book called The 13th Apostle in 2007. Her argument was that Judas in the Gospel of Judas is not a hero at all. He is the most terrible figure in the text, a demon who does the bidding of a lower, malevolent deity. The crucifixion in her reading is not liberation. It is a monstrous cosmic act performed by a monstrous agent. Same manuscript, same Coptic letters, two completely opposite Judases. And then Elaine Pagels and Karen King, Pagels from Princeton, King from Harvard, published their own analysis, Reading Judas, also in 2007. Their reading, the same word, daimon, could be rendered as 13th God. Not a demon, not a spirit, a deity, an entirely different category. 3 teams of world-class scholars, 3 irreconcilable Judases, a hero, a demon, a god. This is what I mean when I say the vertigo of this story doesn't come from the text itself. It comes from discovering that even the people who devoted their careers to recovering this suppressed manuscript cannot agree on what it says. The control mechanism isn't just suppression, it's also ambiguity. It's also the fact that language, ancient language in translation across 2 millennia, carries inside it the possibility of fundamentally different realities. But let's go back to that safe deposit box. I keep returning to those 16 years. 1978 to 1994, the Codex Chakos sitting in a bank vault in Hicksville, New York, a middle-class suburb of Long Island that is, in every conceivable sense, the least mystical place on the planet, while the pages slowly deteriorated from humidity and mishandling. We don't know exactly how many collectors handled the manuscript during those years. We do know that at least one buyer attempted to sell it to Yale University in the 1980s. Yale declined. They suspected the provenance was irregular, which is a polite way of saying it was almost certainly smuggled out of Egypt in violation of Egyptian cultural property law. We know that a Greek dealer named Nikodimos Saros handled it at some point in the 1990s. We know that when Frida Nussberger Chakos finally acquired it around 2000, the manuscript was in terrible condition. Pages broken, fragments separated, significant text lost. Think about what that means. Irenaeus tried to destroy it in 180 AD. It survived. It was buried in the Egyptian desert, possibly by a Christian community that considered it sacred and wanted to protect it from the very persecution that Irenaeus's condemnation would unleash. It survived. It crossed 16 centuries underground and then was pulled into the antiquities market in the late 1970s and spent 16 years in a bank vault on Long Island. And even that it survived. Barely. The determination of this text to exist is, frankly, extraordinary. I want to come back to something I said earlier, because it's the part of this story I find hardest to shake. When I was teaching at that Catholic high school in Evansville, when I was standing at the front of a classroom telling 16-year-olds about the heresies the early church suppressed, I was doing something I didn't fully understand at the time. I was passing on the frame in which Judas is irredeemably evil, the frame in which his act is unambiguously betrayal, the frame in which the texts that said otherwise were dangerous fictions that deserved to be condemned. I cited Irenaeus of Lyon as a source. I used his condemnation of the Gospel of Judas as evidence of what the Gospel of Judas contained. I was teaching the erasure as though the erasure were the text. And the text, the actual text, the 26 pages of Coptic papyrus that had already survived 1,800 years of suppression, was at that exact moment sitting in a climate-controlled conservation lab, being painstakingly restored by a team of scholars who were about to change the conversation forever. I had the condemnation in my curriculum. I did not have the condemned. And when I think about how many students sat in those chairs over 12 years and absorbed that frame, absorbed the certainty that Judas's guilt was settled, that the matter was closed, that history had given its verdict, I feel a very specific kind of weight. Not guilt, exactly, but something adjacent to it. The weight of knowing you were a vehicle for an incomplete story. Here's what we know about how the Gospel of Judas was suppressed. The text was already circulating by 180 AD. We know this because Irenaeus attacked it. But Irenaeus's attack wasn't the decisive blow. The decisive blow came in the 4th century, 325 AD. The Council of Nicaea. 318 bishops gathered in what is now northwestern Turkey, convened by Emperor Constantine to settle, by vote, the defining questions of Christian doctrine. One of the questions on the table, implicitly if not explicitly, which texts are scripture and which are heresy? The Council of Nicaea didn't produce the final biblical canon that day. That took another few decades and several more councils, but it set the political framework. Christianity was now the religion of the Roman Empire, and the religion of the Roman Empire needed a unified text, a single story, not 4 incompatible Judases, not a dozen competing Gospels, one Bible, one Judas, one verdict. The Gospel of Judas was not on the approved list, and for 16 centuries that was enough. What's remarkable, what I find genuinely remarkable, is that the suppression was never complete. People kept copying dangerous texts, kept burying them when persecution came, kept the thread of an alternative understanding alive across century after century after century. The Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in Egypt in 1945, was almost certainly buried by a community of monks in the 4th century, around the time of Nicaea, when possessing certain texts became a punishable act. The Codex Chakos may have been buried by the same impulse. Someone, somewhere, decided this was worth preserving, worth hiding in the earth so that the earth itself would protect it. And the earth did. Here's the question that Irenaeus understood, in 180 AD, was too dangerous to allow. If Judas was following Jesus' direct instructions, then who bears the moral weight of the crucifixion? The canonical Gospels give you a morally tidy answer. A wicked man betrayed an innocent man for 30 pieces of silver, driven by greed and perhaps by the devil himself. The guilty party is identified. The verdict is clear. Judas is damned, and Christians can feel secure in the knowledge that the cosmic drama has a straightforward moral structure. But if Judas was commissioned, if he was, as the Gospel of Judas claims, specifically chosen by Jesus to perform the necessary act that the other 11 could not be trusted to perform, then the moral structure dissolves. Then you have to ask, who gave the order? And if Jesus gave the order, then what does it mean to condemn the man who carried it out? And if the man who carried it out was acting in perfect obedience to the teacher he loved, then what does it mean that 2,000 years of Christians have made his name the universal synonym for treachery? It means they have been calling loyalty betrayal for 20 centuries. That is the thought that Irenaeus wanted destroyed. That is the thought that got buried in a limestone box somewhere near Minya, Egypt, sometime in the 4th century. That is the thought that spent 16 years in a bank vault in Hicksville, New York, slowly crumbling. And it is now, after everything, a thought that you are thinking. I want to stop here for a moment. What you've just encountered, the gap between what is officially taught and what the historical record actually contains, is not an accident. It took real effort to suppress the Gospel of Judas. Real effort by real people who understood exactly how dangerous the question, was Judas following orders, really is. And it takes real effort to recover it, to translate it, to argue about it, to bring it to a channel like this and lay it out, as honestly as I can, including the parts where even the best scholars in the world cannot agree. If this kind of work matters to you, if you believe that recovering what was hidden is worth doing, there's a way to directly support it. The Super Thanks button below. Whatever amount feels right. 100% of what you give goes into the research, the production, the ability to keep doing this. And more than the money, it tells me this is worth continuing. The people who have supported this channel with Super Thanks are the reason I'm still here, and I don't take that lightly. Now here's where I want to be absolutely honest with you about what the evidence does and does not tell us. April DeConick is not wrong to push back on the National Geographic translation. The Coptic word daemon is genuinely ambiguous in this context. 2nd century Gnostic texts use terminology in ways that don't map cleanly onto modern categories. When DeConick says that the National Geographic team produced a translation that was driven more by the desire for a compelling narrative than by rigorous philology, that is a serious charge, and it deserves a serious hearing. At the same time, Elaine Pagels and Karen King are not operating in bad faith when they read the same word as 13th God. They are working from a different set of contextual assumptions about the Gnostic cosmology of the period. Their reading is internally coherent, and Bart Ehrman, whose translation is perhaps the most linguistically cautious, lands somewhere in the middle, acknowledging that Judas is presented as uniquely privileged, as the disciple who alone received the full teaching, while remaining careful not to flatten the text into a simple hero narrative. 3 readings, all by people who have spent decades studying exactly this kind of material. What this means, I think, is not that the text is unknowable. It means the text is genuinely complex. It was written in a time and a theological context that is not simply recoverable. The 2nd century Gnostic world, the world that produced this gospel, was itself a world of competing interpretations, competing cosmologies, competing claims about who Jesus was and what he came to do. The Gospel of Judas is not a simple counter-narrative. It is a sophisticated theological argument that requires a sophisticated reading. And the fact that 3 teams of world-class scholars read it 3 different ways is not a scandal. It is a mirror. It reflects how genuinely deep the ambiguity goes. But here's what is not ambiguous. The text existed. It was condemned. The condemnation worked well enough that almost nobody knew the text had survived. And for 16 centuries, the version of Judas that Irenaeus wanted, the irredeemably evil traitor, the damned man, the synonym for treachery, was the only version that most Christians ever encountered. That is not ambiguous. JJJ. Benítez spent decades investigating exactly this kind of gap. The gap between the official story and the historical record. The gap between what the councils decided and what the documents show. And what drew him again and again was not the desire to undermine faith. It was the conviction that genuine faith, honest faith, has to be built on honest history. The question the Gospel of Judas opens is not, was Judas a good person? That's the wrong question. The wrong frame. The question is, what does it mean that for 2,000 years, a document that told a fundamentally different story about one of the central figures of Christianity was systematically suppressed, and that the suppression was so effective that a Catholic school history teacher could spend 12 years teaching Irenaeus' condemnation of the text without knowing the text had survived? That is a question about power, about which stories get preserved and which get buried, about who decides which version of events becomes the version that 2 billion people inherit. And it is a question that is not specific to Christianity or to the first century. It is a question about how all official narratives work, how the version that wins always writes the version that loses as evil, how the condemned man always gets condemned by the people who needed him condemned. Judas's name has been a curse word for 2,000 years, and the document that offered a different explanation for what he did spent 16 of those years in a bank vault in Hicksville, New York. I'll let you sit with that. 2,000 years of betrayal. One sentence changes everything. You will sacrifice the man that clothed me. He didn't betray Jesus. He followed the only instruction that mattered, and the men who condemned him for it needed the condemnation to be true. I want to know what this does to you. Not what you think about it, what it does to you. Because I've been living with this question for years, and I still haven't fully settled it. If Judas was following orders, if his act was obedience, not betrayal, what does that change for you? Does it change your understanding of the crucifixion? Does it change your understanding of what Christianity is asking you to believe? Does it make you angry that this text was suppressed? Or does DeConick's reading, that Judas was a demon, not a hero, give you some relief? Tell me in the comments. Tell me which of the 3 readings lands for you. Ehrman's intimate disciple, DeConick's demon, Pagels and King's 13th God. I read every single comment on this channel. Every one, and the conversations that happen in those comments are genuinely some of the best historical discussion I've ever been part of. If you want to keep going, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the texts from Nag Hammadi that nobody ever mentions in church, they're here, on this channel. Just keep watching.